Good morning to our second week vlog. Today, we are going to discuss to you about the performance assessment. What is performance assessment? Performance assessment is also known as alternative or authentic assessment. It is a form of testing that requires students to perform a task rather than select an answer from a ready-made list. For example, a student may be asked to explain historical events, generate scientific hypotheses, solve math problems, converse in a foreign language, or conduct research on a assigned topic, so the teachers will judge the quality of the student's work and based on agreed upon set of criteria. Why we use performance assessment? We use performance assessment because they require students to actively demonstrate what they know. Performance assessments may be a more valid indicator for students' knowledge and abilities. So there is a big difference between answering multiple choice questions on how to make an oral presentation and actually making an oral presentation. The meaning and nature of performance assessment. This assessment measures how well students apply their knowledge, skills, and abilities to authentic problems. The key feature is that it requires the student to produce something such as report, experiment, or performance, which is scored against specific criteria. What is the purpose of performance assessment? Performance assessment can provide impetus for improving instruction and increase students' understanding of what they need to know and be able to do. In preparing their students to work on performance tasks, teachers describe what the task entails and the standards that will be used to evaluate performance. This requires a careful description of the elements of good performance and allows students to judge their own work as they proceed.
Principles of performance assessment. Learner's assessment is used to describe what learners' abilities to perform skills with appropriate knowledge and attitude and to determine if capability for practice is demonstrated.
Accountability. To ensure accountability is maintained, assessors must ensure the assessment process is transparent, valid, and reliable. Assessors are the gatekeepers for the profession. This means it is every assessor's responsibility to ensure they only pass learners who are able to meet the practice standards to protect the vulnerable public and maintain professional integrity. Performance-based assessment. The second principle is that learner assessment should be performance-based, undertaken in a context that reflects the demands of a practice situation. Evidence-based assessment. The third principle outlined is the concept of evidence-based assessment. This principle outlines the requirements that assessing competence requires an accumulation of data and quality evidence about the performance of the learner over a period of time and in a range of clinically related contexts. In addition, the assessors needs to gather evidence from multiple sources, self-assessment, peer assessment, interview, observation, and documentation in a range of contexts to support their assertion that a learner does or does not meet the standards for the practice. Validity and reliability in assessment. In the context of the learner assessment framework, validity refers to the extent to which the assessment meets the intended outcomes. Therefore, to ensure validity, the assessment must consider the learner's knowledge, skills, values, and attitude in a context which most reflects practice, measured against the professional standards of practice. The reliability in this context is the consistent and accurate assessment of performance evidence by the collection of a large array of data. This should be done through a validated tool. This principle indicates that assessors need to be knowledgeable about the practice standards and application of these standards to the system. Participation and collaboration. The final principle highlights the role of participation and collaboration between the assessor and the learner as an essential part of the assessment process, for example, through process interviews. This collaborative relationship between the assessor and the student helps ensure that the assessment process is transparent and rigorous. Through a collaborative partnership, learners become more confident about the assessment methods.
Hello everyone! Again, this is Mara Galaw Parani. So for today's video, we will tackle about designing a performance task.
Here are the process for designing performance task. Number 1. Identify learning goals. Think about what will be your goals to be assessed through this performance task. These can include standards, long-term transfer goals, and mission-related outcomes. Number 2. Consider key traits implied by the goals. Think about the important qualities must students demonstrate to show attainment of standards and other identified goals, because these will serve as the criteria by which student performance will be judged. Number 3. Consider one or more of the suggested framework for thinking. How will the task involve higher order thinking? By considering resources such as depth of knowledge, 6 facets of understanding, content or process matrices, and task frames. Number 4. Generate initial task ideas. In this process, we will think on how we'll demonstrate students' understanding and proficiency. By outlining the basic task to gather the evidence, we will use to assess depth of understanding and level proficiency. Number 5. Check for validity and alignment. In this process, you will think to what extent will the task provide acceptable evidence of the target goals, by considering if the students could perform the task and meet the evaluative criteria without demonstrating the targeted goals. Number 6. Use GRASP's model to flesh out task details. For better understanding the GRASP's model, here is Angelo Castel for the discussion about this model and how to use in developing authentic assessment.
Hi guys, again this is Angelo Castel. For today's video, we will tackle about GRASP model, a guide in developing authentic assessment task.
What is authentic assessment task? It is what is done in the real world, which address realistic problems and have realistic options, with a realistic audience and genuine purpose. And when we say GRASP's model is an acronym for Goal states the problem or challenge to be resolved. Role explains who students are in the scenario and what they are being asked to do. Audience, who the students are solving the problem for, who they need to convince of the validity and success of their solution for the problem. Remember, the audience is not limited to the instructor. Situation provides the context of the situation and any additional factors that could impede the resolution of the problem. Product, performance, and purpose explains the product or performance that needs to be created and its larger purpose. Standards and criteria for success dictates the standards that must be met and how the work will be judged by the assumed audience.
Thank you, Angelo Castel. Now we know what is GRASP's model. Let's continue the sixth process for designing performance tasks, which is using GRASP's model to flesh out task details. By establishing the context, consider real-world application of learning along with students' interests and experience. And because of using the GRASP's elements, it helps us to establish a more authentic situation. And number 7. Develop scoring rubrics. In a way of establishing the context, consider real-world application of learning along with students' interests and experience. I'm Mahara.
And I'm Angelo.
These will be the end of our
discussion.
Electronic portfolios, also known as digital portfolio, online portfolio, or e-portfolio, is a collection of electronic evidence assembled and managed by a user or a learner, usually on the web. Such electronic evidence may include input text, electronic files, images, multimedia, blog entries, and hyperlinks. E-portfolios are both demonstrations of the learner's or the user's abilities and platforms for self-expressions. E-portfolios consist of 3 types. These are first, the developmental portfolio, also called as learning portfolios, reflection portfolios, formative portfolios, and working portfolios. Its uses is to demonstrate work in progress, includes self-assessment and reflection, and focuses on the portfolio as a process and emphasizes reflection. The second type of e-portfolio is the showcase portfolio. This is also known as professional portfolios, formal portfolios, presentation portfolios, representational portfolios, and career or employment portfolios. Its uses are demonstrates exemplary work or skills, illustrates experience and achievement, and focuses on the portfolio as a product. And the last but not the least type of e-portfolio is the assessment portfolio, also called summative portfolios. This is generally used by the instructors or educators, where students provide work in the format of a developmental or showcase portfolio. It is typically a systematical collection of student work demonstration, competencies, and achievement of set criteria, standards, and or goals, according to O'Malley and Valdez of 1996.
A scoring rubric is an efficient tool that allows you to objectively measure student performance on an assessment activity. Rubrics may vary in complexity, but generally do the following: focus on measuring very specific stated learning outcomes, and use a range to rate performance. There are 2 types of rubric. These are the analytical and holistic rubric. Holistic rubric provides you with a quick option to assess student work as a whole, and analytic rubric have multiple criteria. You assess the level of achievement for each. So these are the examples of analytic and holistic rubrics. To better understand the components of rubrics, I'm going to share with you a short video that explains the components of rubrics.
Before we begin to interpret and analyze the rubrics, we want to ensure we know the components of the rubrics. Each best practice rubric is divided into 4 columns. Each column represents a specific type of culture. for the learning environment. Number 1 is conventional. Number 2 is collaborative culture. Number 3 is synergistic culture. And number 4 is innovative culture. In each best practice rubric, you will have a description of the best practice that we call a descriptor. You will begin by reading the descriptor to give an overall view of what is that best practice. Then you will notice that there are specific teacher skill sets labeled in each column and row. These are called growth indicators, and we read them from left to right. That would be considered row 1. We would start with the growth indicator in conventional culture and progress to collaborative, synergistic, and innovative to see how they progress in complexity and in elements. What that is called is analyzing the row. You would see what is the topic of this row, by what common phrases or nouns are used multiple times, and what is the progression of skills. So those are the basic components of the rubric that you will need to know as we interpret and analyze rubrics.
Good day. Today I will be tackling on scoring rubrics on development. Rubrics are sets of criteria or scoring guides that describe levels of performance or understanding. They provide students with expectations about what will be assessed, standards that need to be met, and information about where students are in relation to where they need to be. According to Rualdi 2002, the steps in developing a scoring rubrics are: identify qualities for the highest score, select analytic or holistic scoring. If analytic scoring is used, develop scoring schemes for each factor. Define the criteria for the lowest level and contrast the lowest and highest level to develop. So now let's talk about interpretation and utilization on scoring rubrics. A rubric is a scoring guide which criteria for evaluating students' works in direct relation to one or more of the program's learning outcomes and a rating scale indicating differing levels of performance. A good rubric must have a list of specific criteria to be rated. Effective rubrics use a lot of descriptive language. The more specificity used, the easier it is for raters to assign a score and the easier it is for students to verify and understand their scores. Rubrics can enhance students' learning by having consistency in the way teachers score the individual assignments, as well as keeping consistency between the ways different teachers scores the same assignments. Rubrics can also improve students' learning by allowing students to participate.